Long before I was born, my father left the country in which he was born and eventually started it all over in the United States. It was only well after I grew up that I realized how incredibly hard that was. First, just getting out was deadly, because he lived on the other side of the Iron Curtain, and border guards with their machine guns weren't waving any friendly goodbyes. Getting into the U.S. was hard, because America didn't want Eastern Europeans. But after he arrived, things didn't get any easier. He spoke 6 languages, but none of them was English. He had no savings, no connections, and the demand for history professors with a conspicuous Hungarian accent was non-existent. The point is, everything about immigrating is incredibly hard. Language, cultural conflicts, money or lack thereof, family or lack thereof. Immigrating is one giant, never-ending battle. And that's when your mental health is good, which is why I found today's episode so spellbinding. It's about an immigrant who struggled with all the usual things, but also had another massive challenge. That involved a controversial disorder that a lot of mental health professionals told me is actively feared by mental health professionals. Like when clinicians find out someone has this, some of them won't even pick up the phone. It's called borderline personality disorder. The woman we'll call Gwen, she asked us not to use her real name, grew up surrounded by it. And it would take her decades to realize that, then years more to figure out what it meant for her, and that she would have to radically rethink everything again. This is Brain Stories, a show about one of the most bewildering mysteries of the human experience, mental illness, told by people who live with it and those who support them. I'm your host, Frank Kosa. Today's episode includes descriptions of physical abuse, eating disorders, and suicidal thoughts, so listen with care. It's produced by Sarah Haufrecht. Spoiler alert, when it comes to borderline personality disorder, she has her own expertise.
Gwen was born in 1994 in a rural part of mainland China. This was during the time of the Chinese government's one-child-only policy. But even though Gwen was an only child, she was raised by 2 parents who were barely out of adolescence and often acted like kids themselves.
There was a lot of my parents having friends over, drinking, playing mahjong, smoking, quote-unquote, a lot of partying.
But in the house, the behavior went way beyond drunken partying.
My earliest memories are my parents throwing things at each other, yelling and screaming, and me feeling very unsafe and fearful. Waking up in the middle of the night, not finding anybody in the house, pitch dark, and me running outside onto the street looking for my parents.
Gwen's mother was jealous and possessive. When Gwen was little, we're talking 4 or 5 years old here, she would insist on Gwen basically chaperoning her father when he left the house at all hours of the night.
I remember my mom telling me to follow my dad around town because he's going to go cheat on her. So wherever he goes, I was told to not leave an inch.
When Gwen was 6, her father immigrated to the United States, and she and her mom moved in with her mother's parents. But her new home didn't prove any calmer. There were constant arguments between her and her mom, her grandma and her mom, her grandpa and her mom, basically anyone and her mom.
Sometimes they'll even get physical. And I remember one time my grandpa got up and wanted to throw a stool at my mom, and my mom did not back down. And she said, "I dare you to throw it at me." And it was just that. It's just very dysfunctional.
Gwen buried herself in schoolwork. She was smart and quickly became an academic superstar. Gwen recalled one day when she came home from school with a couple of test scores she was really proud of.
I got 100 in math, but I missed 0.3 points on an English exam.
That's 0.3 of a point. She got a 99.7.
So I was the one who got the highest score in the class.
Her mother wasn't impressed.
Instead of praising me, my mom gave me a beating. Her reasoning was that you didn't try hard enough. If you had tried hard enough, then you could have gotten 100 in both subjects.
People familiar with borderline personality disorder might recognize her mom's behaviors as symptoms of the 9 criteria for a diagnosis. Now, as an adult, Gwen can name almost all of them, off the top of her head.
Intense emotions, the frequent mood swings, the extreme behaviors, impulsivity, violence, fear of abandonment, depression.
But at the time, as a little girl, she had no idea.
So I felt like that was normal behavior from my mom. She is erratic and unpredictable like that.
Gwen did get praise for her hard work in school, just not from her mother.
My grandma was a math teacher, so she instilled the value of education and how education could change your life. That was something that was never taught to me by my parents.
This was also when Gwen's grandmother drilled traditional Chinese values into her, especially ones about hardship.
There's a saying in Chinese, the more bitterness you eat, the higher you will go. And the more difficulties you overcome, the more outstanding you would be. And that's something she would always tell me.
Then there was the other message her grandmother reminded her of every chance she could. Gwen's future was in the United States.
Having a family member overseas, that means you have this ticket, you have this path to wealth and success and the American dream.
Gwen's dad only added fuel to that fire. He would send money home every month, along with photographs of iconic tourist sites, like Disneyland and the Las Vegas Strip. In the photos, he always looked carefree and happy.
It was palm trees, sunglasses on Hollywood Boulevard, like all the tourist sites you could think of. It's a fairy tale.
When Gwen was 10, she and her mother got visas to join her dad in the U.S. Gwen was excited, but the pressure was enormous. They were going so Gwen could get into a great school, become an engineer, lawyer, or doctor, and lift the entire family out of poverty. It was such a big deal that her grandmother flew with Gwen and her mom to Beijing. Seated next to her on the plane, Gwen's grandmother made a request Gwen would never forget.
My grandma basically asked me to make a vow that I would get into a prestigious school and to remember this day as a day that I made that promise. I was like, yeah, of course, I'm going to get into Harvard. I'm going to do it.
Gwen and her mother flew on to Los Angeles, where she saw her father for the first time in 4 years. For those first weeks together, being in America was like that fairy tale.
He would take me and my mom to eat out at nice Chinese restaurants, Korean barbecue, which we've never had. He'd take us to the beach. And then I remember the first week, he would come back home with a different plushie every night. And he would put it by my bedside.
But it didn't take long for the fantasy to implode. First of all, Gwen had trouble fitting in, despite the fact that her family had settled in a part of LA that had the single highest concentration of Chinese Americans in the country.
Bob, that's what they called me. Fresh off the boat, Bob. Yeah, and that's been my name for a long time. Until I became quote-unquote Americanized.
At home, things weren't any better than they had been in China. After the first month, her father barely paid attention to her and her mother.
I also had this very idealized image of him because he's quote-unquote American and he was going to, make our lives great. But of course, all of those things were quickly shattered because as soon as the three of us started living together, all the problems come because of the way my mom is and because of the way my dad is.
Here's a typical example. A celebration that almost never goes wrong, that went all wrong.
My mom made a table full of feast for my dad. It was his birthday. And she called him asking him when he would come back. And he said, my birthday is not today. And then my mom threw the birthday cake in the trash. And I remember that because to me, birthday cake is so significant. Why would you throw that away?
It wasn't long before her mom and dad's pattern of violence and abuse crept right back into their lives. Gwen remembered one battle that was particularly explosive.
My dad was trying to leave. My mom did not want him to leave. She said, stop him. He's going to go cheat on me, which was the same thing she's been saying for years. And my dad was opening the car door to drive, and she was pulling on the steering wheel. And the car door came off. And I was screaming and yelling, telling my dad to not hit her.
This was all in full view of the neighbors, who called the police.
The cops came. There were a lot of them, and they handcuffed my dad to the ground. And my mom, even though she was all bruised up at this point, she begged me not to tell the cops the truth about what happened.
Her mom was screaming all this to Gwen in Chinese, so the cops didn't understand a word.
She said, "Don't tell them, just let him go." And I did. She was crying for days after that because my dad wanted to divorce her. He wanted to leave and abandon us, and she was very fearful. It just felt like a ticking bomb, like she could explode any moment.
Months later, her parents told her to pack up and move in with her mom's sister. The reason they gave was that they wanted her to improve her English.
They said that the district that my aunt was at offered ELD classes, and that's why they dropped me off with my aunt. But now thinking back, no, it was like avoiding parental responsibility because they still didn't know how to be parents.
The move did nothing to improve Gwen's lot. For one, her aunt didn't have a room for Gwen. She didn't even have a bed. Gwen just slept on the floor. Her aunt moved to a house the next year, but there still wasn't a room for Gwen.
I was initially designated a closet, like the closet underneath the staircase, like Harry Potter.
Through all of this, Gwen still yearned to be with her parents, or at least some fantasy of them.
I still wanted a mom and a dad, and I wanted to have dinner together, and I wanted to be like every other family.
That opportunity seemed to arrive when her mom got pregnant. Gwen moved back in with her parents when she was 11, right before her brother was born. She was excited to be a big sister, and for a year, it went okay. But then her brother didn't hit some basic milestones. The family grew concerned.
We started noticing him not talking, not interacting with other people, being fixated on objects, not being able to verbalize himself or point to things or have eye contact.
By the time he was 2, he had a diagnosis of autism. It left the family reeling. Her parents actually thought their son was cursed.
I guess that was how they viewed people that are disabled or have some kind of disorder. They're not complete human beings. That's some type of belief, like a folklore, that children or individuals who are born with developmental disabilities have lost a part of their soul. So when he was diagnosed at 2, my mom was very, very devastated.
And her father's reaction was even worse.
That was when he started becoming more and more violent towards me.
One night, her dad returned from work. She was at the computer finishing homework after putting her brother to bed. Her dad seemed on edge. He demanded to know why Gwen hadn't sent the usual text that she was home. When she didn't respond how he wanted, he blew up.
He threw a chair at me, proceeded to drag me by the hair and then by my ankle into the room, turn off all the lights, and started beating me, pounding my head against the floor, choking me. And then he dragged me by the hair to the kitchen, got out the kitchen scissor, and cut off my hair.
In Chinese culture, cutting someone's hair against their will is a shattering punishment, like chopping off a part of your identity. After her father left the kitchen, Gwen looked at her hair on the floor and got a broom.
I kept the hair. I swept them up and I kept it. To remember the pain that I went through, and I refused to throw away that part of me.
The stress, conflict, and abuse took its toll. Gwen became depressed. She began to think about ending her own life.
I was having self-harm behaviors, cutting my wrist. My anger and my frustration and my emotions had nowhere to go. And I think feeling pain numbs how I feel on the inside.
When her parents found out, their response only made everything worse.
They had me kneel down on the ground. And that's one of the ways that Chinese parents use to discipline their kids, is to have you kneel down. And they berated me and yelled at me and threatened me to not do that again in a very intimidating way. I felt like it was more of an embarrassment to them than anything else.
One day, when Gwen was 16, she got home from school to find her mother crying inconsolably. Her father had taken off. Her mother offered no explanation why or for how long, only that he was gone.
He left me cash, a few $100s in my drawer, and that was it.
It was only later that Gwen found out that her father had been arrested on suspicion of fraud. Instead of facing the possibility of jail time, he fled back to China. But at this point, all Gwen knew was that her mother was in agony. What her mom had always feared, being abandoned, had happened. Her mother stopped taking care of the house, and then herself.
I remember I woke up and tried to cook something, and the rice cooker was full of maggots and flies because she had not used or cleaned the rice cooker for several weeks.
Her dad's disappearance did create one immediate need: money. So Gwen's mother pulled herself together enough to start working at her sister's restaurant. The long shifts of her mother's job meant a radical new role for Gwen.
Cooking, cleaning, housekeeping, showering, putting him to sleep. I became the primary caretaker of my brother, and he was 3 years old at the time.
As her brother grew older, he began qualifying for services and eventually started school. As the only one in the family who spoke English, Gwen was in charge of all of it.
Being home and supervising when he received ABA services, attending parent meetings on behalf of my mom, IEP meetings, regional center assessments, developmental assessments, yearly reevaluations, and doctor appointments. I realized it's more like my own child that I have to take care of.
Her mother became increasingly erratic, irritable, and unreasonable. It didn't matter how hard Gwen worked, how much she helped around the house, or cared for her brother. Her mom always found fault.
Whenever she comes home, my heart drops. I don't know what's going to happen. Is she going to throw things at me? Is she going to start hitting me? Is she going to find something to punish me today?
Gwen grew increasingly depressed.
I always felt like a monster, and I was always an outcast. I didn't have anybody to talk to. I go to school, come back immediately, take care of my brother, and the day repeats. So I just felt like I was invisible. It felt like I was a ghost floating in this world. And I had this deep sense that something was wrong with me.
Her cutting only got worse, her thoughts of suicide more frequent. All this time, only one teacher noticed the cuts on her wrist. She sent Gwen to the school counselor.
The counselor asked, how's everything going? And I'm like, good. And they asked, is everything okay at home? And I'm like, yeah.
The counselor gave her some pamphlets.
And they just let me go.
But as bad as life got, Gwen remained an academic star. She graduated high school at the top of her class, making good on that promise to her grandmother. And she got accepted at a nationally ranked college. Her academic success also offered her an escape. She got to live on campus.
When I first got to college, it was exciting, and I had friends for the first time, and being included in social interactions, it made me feel normal. It felt like a luxury.
Gwen's problems didn't all just magically disappear. She still struggled with depression and was known to be moody and hypercritical of herself and others. It even cost her a few friendships. But for the most part, her first year in college was liberating. In her sophomore year, she took organic chemistry. It's a make-or-break class for anyone who wants to go to medical school. For the first time in her life, she bombed.
And it broke me. Then the anxiety and the depression came in, and it was just like flood. All of a sudden, I feel like my thoughts are constantly racing. I feel like I can't breathe.
Her response to all that anxiety was to work harder than ever. But the price was enormous.
I went to the gym, but I would only eat a mandarin orange or an apple and some tea for dinner. So I lost a lot of weight very quickly.
She dropped to 90 pounds.
I'm not eating, not socializing, not spending time on myself because I need to do this for my family.
She enrolled in organic chemistry again. A lot of pre-med students take it twice before passing, so she felt like it would be fine. But her final grade was a D. Not good enough. At this point, she began to unravel.
Hold that thought, Sarah. This is Frank, and I'm jumping in to tell you about something that really matters to me. I pride myself on paying attention in the world and knowing what's going on. I want a source that I completely trust, that tells stories I believe truly matter. That's why my first stop, sometimes my only stop, is Mindsight News. It's nonprofit, nonpartisan journalism, and it's the only national news outlet devoted exclusively to covering mental health. I'm not paid for this. It's just a place I really like and believe is doing good work, so I'm sharing it with you. Go to mindsightnews.org and check it out. That's Mindsight, MINDSITE news.org, and sign up for their free newsletter. It's the best information and reporting that I see anywhere. Now back to our story about Gwen.
I was experiencing these psychotic symptoms and me feeling very, very scared that I was losing my mind, that I was going insane, and that I was going to be homeless, I was going to be abandoned by society, and that I'm going to be one of those quote-unquote crazy people.
She fell into despair.
I would go to sleep, and then that 1 second when I was gaining conscious is when I feel at peace. But right after I open my eyes, it's just rush of anxiety and pain and suffering and feeling like I can't breathe and wanting everything to end. That feeling of torment just rushes in and it goes on for the whole day until I fall asleep. So every day I was looking forward to sleeping so that I wouldn't feel that intense sense of torment and suffering. And I wish I could just go to sleep and not wake up.
She went to the on-campus psychiatrist. She described her symptoms and how much she wanted to die. He gave her a prescription for an antidepressant. She had already been required to sign a written agreement stating she would not harm herself.
I remember coming out of the psychiatrist's office and just crying for an hour because he said that I have to be on this medication for at least a year. And I just felt so sorry for myself. I am over here having to take a pill to make me happy every single day.
Gwen was lucky. The medication provided almost immediate relief from her depression, which was amazing. But it wasn't a solution. That was going to take a lot of work, starting with the most basic question.
How did I get from a 20-year-old going to one of the highly ranked university that is a beautiful campus, a very desirable place that anybody would be jealous to be at? How did I end up in a place where I have to sign my name to promise somebody not to end my life?
In the middle of all this, Gwen enrolled in a psychology class. The only reason she signed up was that it was a graduation requirement.
I've always thought of it as useless. And I think like a lot of Asian American families, the ticket to higher socioeconomic status and stability is becoming either a doctor, engineer, or a lawyer. Because as an ethnic minority in America, it's very important to have a highly specialized and technical skill set. So I've always had a lot of contempt for humanity majors because I thought that I wasn't going to survive with a career like that.
But she found the psychology class more interesting than her pre-med track. So she took more psychology classes and eventually changed her major to psychology.
Changing my major without even consulting or telling any of my family, it was decisive for me to do so because that was kind of me retaliating. It was me choosing to prioritize myself. I would say it was empowering.
And one day, she was reading a textbook that described borderline personality disorder.
What jumped out at me was like intense emotions, the frequent mood swings, the extreme behaviors, impulsivity, violence, fear of abandonment, depression.
It sparked an epiphany.
And all of those things are my mom.
I have to pause here and underscore how momentous this is for someone like Gwen, because I know what this moment feels like. When I was roughly 30, I opened up a book my therapist gave me with those 9 diagnostic markers. My reaction was identical. Those things were my mom too. But in Gwen's case, this revelation went much further. The more she read about borderline personality disorder, the more she realized it wasn't just her mom. The stories her grandmother told her about growing up in China took on a completely new meaning.
She would tell me about the 1959 famine, where about 2/3 of her village has been wiped out from starvation and having to steal raw vegetables from the landowners' farms and being scared of getting caught, having been through complex trauma and seeing dead corpses when she was 10 years old and constantly lived in fear.
Her grandmother also had many of the 9 markers of borderline personality disorder. Maybe all those events had played a factor.
That's been a theme in my family, chaos and violence.
And that's when Gwen put it all together and began to see the full picture.
Repeatedly, I noticed all of the ex-boyfriends from my failed relationships have been saying the exact same thing to me, that I'm highly critical, I focus on the negatives, I am intimidating, I'm aggressive, I don't care about them, I'm inconsiderate, I'm not empathetic to their feelings. And then I started to recognize there's been a pattern.
Which led her to a conclusion about borderline personality disorder, BPD for short, that came as no surprise. At least not to her.
I'm an individual with high-functioning BPD and high-functioning depression, in that despite the fact that I have these conditions, I still make sure that I get things done. But that doesn't mean that I don't have mental illnesses. I definitely still have fear of abandonment, sensitivity to rejection, feeling of emptiness, a lot of dissociation. I definitely have all of those things.
The fact that Gwen recognizes this about herself is no small feat. People diagnosed with borderline personality disorder have a reputation for being resistant to both treatment and self-reflection, becoming defensive, vindictive, and even violent. They also have the highest suicide rate of all the major mood disorders. This can make it scary for friends and family to try to help them. But the worst part is, they're feared by those whose very job it is to help, clinicians.
They still say, if a borderline walks into your office, send them out.
That's Lila Galustian, a therapist who specializes in borderline personality disorder.
They're crazy. Don't even bother. Don't even try. No one can help them.
She described how the diagnosis can actually be a red flag.
When they would call therapists and they'd be like, I have the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. I'm looking for a therapist. They wouldn't get callbacks.
This, despite the fact that treatment for borderline personality disorder has a really high success rate when therapists are effectively trained.
Recovery is actually extremely high. I've been treating since 2017 as a licensed therapist. I think I can say I've had 3% that did not completely recover, because if they're not doing the behaviors, they don't meet the criteria for it anymore. The diagnosis gets taken away. You just don't have a diagnosis anymore.
But Gwen didn't know this. She was inclined to face it the way she faced so much of life already, by forging her own path. So she got to work.
In the past 10 years, ever since I first got on medication, it was just a lot of learning and self-education through books, podcasts, TED Talks, videos, attending support groups, connecting with organizations that have a similar mission.
8 years after she finished college, Gwen has almost completed a master's degree to become a licensed marriage and family therapist. In 2023, she became deeply involved in developing a mental health warm line specifically for the Chinese American community. It's the first one in the nation that offers support and resources in Cantonese, Mandarin, and English. You could say that Gwen turned her pain into purpose, both figuratively and literally. Those scars on her wrist from cutting, they're not just scars anymore. They're her mantra.
I have a tattoo over those things right now.
What does it say, though?
Live well, laugh often, love much.
I asked Gwen if she thinks she'll ever be able to talk to her mom face-to-face about BPD. But she didn't say. Instead, she told me a story about a road trip she took to Sedona, Arizona. There, she spent time visiting several historic temples in the city. It was in one of those temples that she found something that resonated with her.
There were quotes of donors who has donated to the temple, and one of the tiles says, "I forgive you, Mom. Rest in peace." I think that really touched me, because I don't know when I could say that. Hopefully it's during her lifetime. Yeah, I want to get to a place where I could say, "I forgive you, Mom."
I know how hard it is to forgive a mom like Gwen's. Erratic, explosive, vindictive, because that was also my mom. I take solace in the fact that the last thing I said to my mom was that I loved her, but I never got the chance to forgive her. In 2015, after years of struggling with all 9 symptoms of borderline personality disorder, having alienated almost all of her friends and family, 2 divorces, a bankruptcy, and multiple addictions to prescription drugs and alcohol, the pain was just too much. She drove almost 100 miles away and parked her car near an Amtrak line, listened for the whistle of an oncoming train, and walked onto the tracks. That might have been my mother's story, but I don't think that's Gwen's story. I see so much hope in the person she is today, a fortitude she developed not in spite of, but because of her family.
Resilience has been a theme in my family history, and this indestructible spirit of toughness and strength demonstrated by all the women in my family.
That toughness and strength shows up in her everywhere, but especially in her relationship with her brother. She loves him deeply, and she fights for him as hard as she can. Recently, the state slashed the number of service hours for his disability from 200 to 4. To appeal that ruling, she and her mom had to attend a hearing. As usual, Gwen did all the testifying.
The trial was 5 hours, and I was interrogated one question after another. Can your brother use a microwave? No. Why can't he use a microwave? Describe how he uses the microwave. And it's just a million follow-up questions, and it's ridiculous.
Gwen's mom didn't understand the words, but she understood what was happening. And she could see the toll it was taking on her daughter.
And after the proceeding ended, she started crying. She said, "I don't want this anymore. I don't want to put my daughter through that again."
For the first time in memory, Gwen saw someone she had always hoped was there, beneath the trauma, the anger, the borderline personality disorder. A mother who wanted to protect her.
Maybe after all those years and decades of abuse and torture, maybe I can let my heart open again.
So Gwen did something she hadn't done in decades.
I hugged her, and I don't remember when I had hugged her, ever. And I put my hand on top of her hand, and that was a physical intimacy we've never had, I felt like. Beyond 10 years old.
For me, one of the most meaningful parts of meeting Gwen is to see how generations of trauma don't have to be repeated. Gwen is not destined to become her mother any more than I am destined to become mine.
I think just understanding the tenacity of the human spirit and the depth of human resilience means that no matter how much trauma you've been through, no matter how alone, hopeless, and helpless you feel, you can ultimately transform your life.
This episode is dedicated in loving memory to Alan Mark Haufrecht. Miss you, Dad.
Gwen's story was produced by Sarah Haufrecht. Her dad passed away from cancer while she was working on the show. Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, share it with your friends, your family, or perfect strangers. Your recommendation is a superpower. Help us by using it. Coming up on the next episode of Brain Stories, Lindsay Galvin Rausch was the youngest child in a family of 12, where 6 of her siblings would develop schizophrenia. The family would become the subject of a best-selling book called Hidden Valley Road. It's an extraordinary story. But in a departure from our usual approach, we're not going to tell her story. But she's going to tell us what was left out and what's happened since. Don't miss it. You can find out more about borderline personality disorder at our website, or visit Leela Galustians. She's the therapist who specializes in those with a diagnosis of BPD and was a terrific resource for this episode. You can find her website at www.re-discoveringyou.com. That's re-discoveringyou.com. Thanks to the team that made this story possible. Our associate producer and editor was Kate Ruscosa. Karen Given was our incredible story editor. Original music came from our composer, Paul Swartzel. And our audio mixer was Rob Byers. The show is executive produced by Frank Kosa and Janet Yang. Thanks to our advisors and all our supporters. This show is a copyright of Brain Stories Productions and the Sam O'Bay Corporation. The use of this episode or any of its content in any form or way for artificial intelligence, its development or training, is copyright infringement and expressly prohibited without prior written agreement. The next episode of Brain Stories will be out December 18th. Put it on your calendar, or make life easy and just follow us. I'll see you then.